Blush Cameron here with a new episode of my new podcast. You just heard a clip from my new song called Ribbons on the Cuffs. It's available everywhere you usually listen to music. Today's episode is a special one for me. I barely know where to begin with this intro. Aaron Hemphill used to play in a band called LIARS. LIARS is easily one of the most interesting and unique bands of the last 2 decades, and they've been one of my top most consistent influences, literally since I was 13 years old. I found their debut album, quote, "They threw us in a trench and stuck a monument on top," unquote, in an FYE way back in the day. If any Zoomers are listening, FYE was like a CD media type of chain store, typically found in your local shopping mall. Bought a lot of CDs there growing up, and I picked up one of those CDs I picked up was LIARS, the first album. I picked it up because the cover art looked interesting, and I've been listening to them ever since. I still listen to that record. I still listen to all their music on a consistent, regular basis. And their career has just been one of a kind artistically. I think they're really underrated and underappreciated. Their sound ranging from the perfectly executed Gang of Four style dance punk of the first album to experimental noise pop to albums consisting of basically just drums and vocal chants. And their most recent endeavors have been electronic, EDM sort of influenced, kind of like electro punk in some aspects. And on top of that, I think the narrative and mystique behind their whole career has been as equally fascinating as the music. I remember reading that the reason they changed their sound on every album was because they would stop using instruments as soon as they started getting proficient with them. And they'd switch to something else. And things like that were super inspiring to me growing up. And as someone, as a kid that really felt like an outsider and felt, you're always looking for ways to differentiate yourself or like validate your identity. And my identity was being different from everybody. And they were the epitome of being different. Even the first album, the title, "They Threw Us in a Trench and Stuck a Monument on Top," was a reference to the fact that they got lumped in with the dance punk scene of the early 2000s in New York City. But anyways, I followed their whole career, all the albums, all the interviews, all the music videos. So you can imagine how nervous I was to talk to one of my idols for my podcast. A person who only existed through these like surreal and mystical art pieces, which I steadily consumed over the past 15 years. And so the reason this episode happened and came together was Aaron left the band a few years ago, and I became curious to see what he's been up to since. So I followed him on Instagram and spontaneously decided to leave a comment, giving my spiel about how I found his record when I was 13 and how LIARS is one of my favorite bands and so on. And he replied with a DM saying thank you, and he followed me back. And about a week goes by, and I get the idea, what if I ask him to come on my podcast? And I was very nervous about this prospect. for a few reasons. One being that this guy is literally one of my idols since forever. I've mentioned him by name countless times as one of my influences. And secondly, being that LIARS has such a long history. How many albums? Off the top of my head, I don't even want to guess, but more albums than any other guest that's been on this podcast has had. And I usually like to go through the timeline and kind of talk about each album and talk about what was going on in the guest's life, and how was I going to do that with Aaron? That'd be like a 3-4 hour podcast if we did that. The third reason that this was a daunting idea was that LIARS has always been a bit shadowed and kind of had sort of like a carefully crafted image. And we talk about this a little bit. Maybe it wasn't it's intentional, but not always exactly intentional. We talk about that and that idea relating to art in general. But they've never, LIARS was never super upfront about their personal lives, which added this sort of intrigue to the band. That said, that idea also plays into this next bit of information, which is we ended up not being able to talk about LIARS that much. Like I said, Aaron left the band a few years ago, so it's technically not his band anymore. And he felt that any sort of narrative or mystique that the band had built up deserves to be preserved, and he shouldn't be the one to tamper with it, considering it's not his band anymore. And I totally respect that, and I think that is kind of like a testament to LIARS, the project and the band and the idea. And that's what I love about them. So I totally respect that. And we talked about kind of like how you don't want to get to know, sometimes you don't want to know. Sometimes you want the band, whatever it is, not even just LIARS, but it could be anything. It doesn't even have to be a band. That thing that you really love and look up to, it needs to exist the way that it exists to you. And sometimes having that mystique demystified is not what you want as a fan. And I totally respect his opinion on this. And so we ended up having a really fun and interesting conversation anyways. We talked about his life growing up in LA pre-internet. We touched a little bit of LIARS, on LIARS history, mostly the early years as it pertained to his life and his experience living in New York City during the early 2000s. Which, like I mentioned before, was a really happening time with the dance punk revival being a thing, namely the LIARS being the biggest band to come out of that scene, which LIARS were a part of. So we talked about that a little bit. We talked about the music he makes now under the name Nonpareils, which is a really exciting project, and I definitely recommend checking that out. I'll leave links in the podcast description. I'm really looking forward to seeing where his sound goes next. I'm sorry if this is such a long intro. This might be the longest intro I've done that's specifically speaking about the guest, and not, talking about myself. But you can see why I was nervous to do this, because there's so much background and context to cover, and it's just like, how do you approach this? But I'm glad I did. I'm glad I asked him, and I'm glad we got to talk. And I'm very glad to be in touch with him. I mean, this is, somebody I really look up to, and I really appreciate him taking the time to indulge me and answer my questions and be candid. I think it was really cool of him, and I'm very excited and honored to share this episode with you guys. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Aaron Hemphill, formerly of the band LIARS, currently of Nonpareils. Here's the show. How did you end up living in Berlin for long term?
Yeah, so I was let's see, I was living in Los Angeles, and it had been, I'd lived in Los Angeles for a while. It's where I'm from. I was born, but I moved back there after living in actually Brooklyn, and it had been like 5 years, 6 years. And I was just in a place personally where I didn't have much reason to be in LA, and I was on tour a lot with LIARS, and I didn't, I just felt really bad there, to be honest with you. And it was no one's fault but my own, So yeah, I had been out here before, and was working on music a long time ago. And so it was somewhere in Europe where I thought I could be productive, but also live in Europe. And time just went by and things just happened. And I ended up staying. It's already been, I think, 5 years.
Wow. Yeah. That's great though. That's really cool.
Yeah, definitely.
What was it like growing up in LA?
The longer I'm in Berlin, the more I appreciate being born in LA, and I think the time that I was a kid in LA. It was great. My parents were separated really early on, so I grew up in quite a few different parts of LA. Like, my dad lived in the suburbs, and then my mom lived more in the city. So I got to see a lot of LA. But then most of when I was like 10, I mostly grew up in the suburbs, which was really great too. I'm still friends with a few people, and I think it's really, I don't know, it's something I feel lucky for now, like living in the suburbs and like going to shows in the city, and just the ways that we had to be creative to have fun. It's something that I really miss, I guess. Maybe it's like a nostalgia for the time, not really the place.
I feel that.
It's hard. I don't know. Like, I think LA, like many cities, especially now, it's hard to separate the nostalgia for the place or the time, because I think with time, the city becomes less recognizable and faster. So a lot of things that I used to do or go to, or places I used to eat at, aren't there anymore. Neighborhoods change, of course, but really quickly. So I don't know. I think maybe it's a bit of both. It's a nostalgia for the time, how of when I was a teenager growing up, as well as like the things that we had access to. I mean, we're so lucky we didn't even know it, but just so many great bands playing all the time. You get to see
I also feel like back then there was probably so much mystique to the music world and the art world, and going to record stores and zines and, having to find things word of mouth. Do you feel like that plays a part of it?
Absolutely. I think like with my age too, it makes a difference in terms of how I engage with albums, I think, or art or projects. And definitely, for sure. And I think LA, back like when I was a teenager growing up, or even like 20 years ago, it was always this place where no one would want to move there. Like, people would threaten, like, oh, I'm leaving New York for LA, but they never would, because it's like, you have to get a car, you have to deal with this issue sooner or later. And I don't know, my theory is that like Uber and things like that changed it completely. and that's when people started moving there from all over. And at the same time, I left LA, so I lost touch with it. But no, it was, I mean, we used to take, just because we were bored, we would drive like 2 hours to a record store, not knowing if they had anything good or anything better. But it was just like, okay, that's the day that we have. And then at night we'll try to steal some alcohol somewhere or something, and I remember like many times you buy like $20 worth of records and one song might be good. And that was kind of great. Like I miss like being bummed out by records, like buying a full record and having it suck, but you still force yourself to like it because the logo is cool or something.
Yeah, things are very like disposable, and it's so saturated, and since everything is streaming, there's no like risk involved.
Yeah, it's risk, and it's also, I don't think that there's much like there were records or bands that I really fought hard to get into, and sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't. But I don't know. I think maybe, I don't know. People probably still engage with music the same way. I'm just more out of touch with that, sort of how they do it in the current way.
What kind of bands were you into back then, and like what kind of shows, and also how did you get into that kind of stuff, the alternative type of music?
Ooh, it's like twofold. I told you my parents split up early, and I grew up at my mom's for a while, and I had an older brother, and he was into like goth and punk. And I mean, back then, like if you were into music, you were an outcast. But he was more into like goth and punk and then industrial. So he showed me a lot of great music when I was a kid. And then when I moved out of that place and lived with my dad, I just got into I was always into music, but I got into like punk rock, and there was like venues around LA that had like both punk and hardcore shows, but then they'd have other bands, like more sort of artsy bands, and you would just go. You didn't know who was playing. You would just go and pay like $4, or you'd sneak in, and you get exposed to music that way. And then if you're bored, you drive to Hollywood and you go to the record stores and you talk to the person and that works there, and it was a full time, not a job. When you're a teenager, it's like I was just obsessed with it, with music.
That's amazing.
Forever. So it just sounds so archaic, but that's just what I did with my time entirely, really.
Did you play in bands at that point, or?
When I was 16, I started a band, I started a band with my friends, really just to try and open shows that our favorite bands would play. And I think that was the objective for a lot of early bands that I was in. But the first band I was in it's when I was in high school, called Phil's Throne, like like a man named Phil, and his throne, like his toilet. It was named after our singer's grandfather. And I mean, we had like 20 different types of stickers before we even had a song. So it was just a lot of fun. And we,
That's so like of the time.
Yeah, for sure. And I don't know, actually, like when I think back on it, I think that, I mean, this is what everyone says. I think in any sort of type of art or thing that you make, it's like, I think that our attitude was great, actually. Like our songs were really bad, but we like live, I think our goal was just to play on the same bill as our favorite bands and to get kicked out of the venue. So we were like teenagers, super drunk, and just causing complete chaos. So I don't know.
That's so classic.
Yeah, the music was secondary. So I don't know. I mean, I think that the bands like that or music projects like that, I don't know if there's new or current examples of this, but where you can have the music be secondary and still have the band be great. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
I feel like when people ask you the question, what's your favorite record versus what's your favorite band? I think when I answer that question, I can like bands that may not make my favorite music, but what they did in their existence is, you know, remarkable.
you know, it's funny you mentioned that because I love all of LIARS music, but I think what influenced me more than the sound was just like the approach and like the philosophy behind it all, and so it's kind of a funny coincidence that you say that.
Oh wow, yeah. Well, thanks. I mean, I think it's easier for fans of music to form a connection to all the things outside of the music when less information is provided. And of course, that may sound like fans are just forming connections based on misunderstanding or assumptions, but I think it's like fantasy or it's imagination, or I think with art, and when you engage with art or music, it doesn't have to be connections based on fact. I mean, it's like, it's not like, you know what I mean? You like LIARS because we all had the same favorite color and you could prove it. I don't know. You know, it's like, and I think that's a very, it transports you out of a situation you don't want to be in to somewhere more exciting or happier, or it's what is the word I'm looking for? Transportive quality of music, or transportive is not the right word, but
I understand what you're saying though.
yeah,
And you guys
yeah.
were like very enigmatic, and for me as a fan, I definitely um, there's a mystique there that I found really appealing. Was that like intentional, do you think?
Um, yes, I think if you're to ask, so like if you're to ask me about like things being intentional, I think it's important for me to point out that when I say that they were attempted to be intentional, like there's three people in LIARS, and all three of us were very different, and we all had very different ideas and hopes or intentions or things we wanted to set forth. So sometimes that even though one or two of us would intend it to try to communicate something, a lot of it has to do with luck. So when I say, yeah, it was intentional, it doesn't mean that we were experts at executing mystique.
Right, I understand. Yeah, I mean, so much of like music and art in general is very kind of chance, and things happen by accident, and you just roll with it.
I think like a good example, a friend of mine, he sent me this documentary on design, and he's like, oh, did you know that the Mute Records logo came from a letter set? I'm like, yeah, actually I did. I remember when we first got on Mute, I asked Daniel Miller about the design. And so when Daniel started Mute, you know, he was super young. He was in his mom's house. He wanted to put out his first record that he made. And, you know, he I don't, you know, I think I remember him saying it, but he didn't put too much thought into it. It looked good. It was available. It looked finished. And it's like if you don't know the story, you can just like, God, how did they think of this? How did they plan this? Is such a perfect strategy. Your mind could go in such on intense journeys as to how that conclusion was met. And sometimes it's just chance. Sometimes it is labored over. But I think it's the not knowing that gives the person engaging with the music more freedom, and I think that's a great thing.
Yeah, and these days it's so extremely hard to like have that kind of thing with any type of art, because everyone's constantly oversharing on social media, and it's so hard to stay off of it because all of your friends are on it. And I don't, maybe people are more interested in, you know, influencers, quote unquote, or whatever, sharing their entire life, you know, or at least the good parts of it. I don't know. It's very
Yeah.
hard to find that these days, the kind of concealed nature of somebody's work.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know. I think it's there's a band. I don't know if you know this band, Royal Trucks.
No, I'm not familiar.
Okay, they're from the '90s. I think they were really incredible at sort of having this mystique, and they even put out like a VHS tape called "What Is Royal Trucks," and you watch it like to get a glimpse of what's behind the curtain. And I don't know. I don't want to know if it's intentionally like exaggerated, misleading, or confusing, but you end up watching it, you're like, fuck, who are these people? They're crazy, or not. I don't think they're crazy. You're just like, wow, I don't know. You're more interested in them, and kind of there's like a bigger aura of like, how do these people make music, or and you just want to. I don't know. It to me that was very interesting. Like I think they were a really interesting band. I don't really want to know the truth. So,
Yes, I totally feel that.
I think like I was lucky enough to meet people who were involved in some of their early stuff that I was really excited about. And they started telling me about it. I'm like, no, I don't want to know, because who knows? Maybe they were really bad people. Maybe they were good people. I don't know, but it's my record. It's not Royal Trucks' record.
I absolutely feel that. Yeah. So how did LIARS start? I'm very interested in like the beginning of the band and how They Threw Us in a Trench came to be, and I don't know if you could talk about that at all.
Yeah, LIARS started. Angus and I met in Los Angeles, and we just started the way like we were jamming like maybe twice or three times, like where we sat and played instruments together. And I think that we were both quite shy about that. And we got a 4-track cassette recorder, and we realized that it was a great way to put down ideas without like having to improvise in front of each other. And so we just started making songs that way, like together or by ourselves. And it became a way to write music, but also be creative and outside of jamming. Mm-hmm. So very early on, we had like a ton of songs, but we didn't play much to get like live, or together in a room. And that just became pretty much how we made music forever. Until I for when I was in the band. But it was just about that. I mean, I think like every day we made music, and it continued that way just forever. And with the first record, those were songs that we had made on 4-track. And we moved to Brooklyn, and we didn't have any friends, and we were looking for a band to play live. We were like, okay, well, if we're going to be in a band, we have to play live. So we put up a flyer looking for people to play live, and we met Pat and Ron, the bass player and drummer. I'm like, cool, let's jam, let's write some songs. We're like, no, actually, we have a tape. And we gave them a tape with like, I don't know, 20 songs, but like over half of that record, I think, was on it. And then there's a few tracks, maybe one that we wrote all together. But yeah, I mean, yeah, these two guys came, they had experience in bands, and we just gave them a tape. Like, look, we have, 40 songs already, just no people to play them with. And so I think it was backwards in that sense.
What initially inspired that move to New York?
Oh God, I think like our age and just being in LA, and I think New York just seems so different. And maybe people say this all the time, but New York was different back then, and it felt really exciting. And I think it would have been a really stupid answer. Like, it just seemed different and exciting. You know, I think we're at that age where you can just move across the country with a reason like that. I can't say that we had some brilliant reason to do it.
Were you already familiar with the bands that were out there, or like, because people talk about like the late 90s, early 2000s kind of New York scene at the time. Were you familiar? Did you get involved in that at all?
Well, that was a coincidence. I mean, I think that we moved out there and we didn't know that those bands were living there. So I think there was a few times where we would go try to see music like at a venue, and it was just really bad. And we were just like, God, we moved out to New York and the music is horrible. But all these bands that came out around that time that were great, that we became friends with, it was a coincidence. I think it was really incredible that we got to meet those people. And at the time, I think we felt like a little locked into like some New York scene thing. But I think now we're really lucky to be surrounded by such incredible stuff.
Yeah, because I guess, the story that's out there is that They Threw Us in a Trench was named after the fact that you were lumped in with the dance punk sort of scene at the time. Is that true?
Yeah, and I mean, it's, of course, with a lot of time passing by, my opinion of that is like, of course we were. I mean, we only had made one record. It sounds like that. It can easily fit into that category. I think, you at the time, I think we're always thinking about what music we wanted to make in the future, and the ideas that we had that we wanted to, where we could move to, what direction we could head towards. And you haven't moved there yet, but you just know that you can, and you've got all this energy and you're going to do it. And I'm not just that. I mean, if what are people supposed to call it?
Yeah.
So it seems a little, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, you can finish.
No, it just seems a little like, not silly, because I think it's important to sort of have that in you when you first start like getting a project off the ground. Like you should sort of be a little bit anxious,
Yeah, I mean, that's another thing, is like, I sometimes wish I had that sort of like sound to fit a popular scene, and it's hard to make yourself do something like that deliberately. And so, if it happens, just by chance like that, I think that's great.
Yeah. I mean, because you could find that you fit into a more, or you sound similar to what other people are doing in a more organic way, and I think that's incredible. But
did you guys have the intention to like grow an audience, or were you just doing it, without really thinking about the future?
I think, if I remember right, and I could be wrong, we all had day jobs, and we just wanted to figure out a way to make music instead of working. And if that meant touring constantly or whatever we had to do, that's what we did. And I think that we toured a lot, even before right when our first record came out, in a van on our own, playing people's houses, whatever. So we did that a lot. Like we worked really hard, and just played music all the time and wrote music all the time. So I think that was the goal, and we were so busy doing that I think as a side effect, it just seemed to attract the label's attention or things like that, and it just was carried by its own momentum.
Yeah. So at what point did you guys get linked up with Mute, and how did that feel at the time?
So we we put out our first record came out on like on a punk label actually, and Mute reissued it. But so we finished recording that record, and our friend Steve recorded it for like half the price. It was like a lot of friends really helped us out. And we had a 3-month tour of the US booked, like right when that thing came out. So 3 months straight in like a van, playing all sorts of different I mean, it was crazy. But the last show of that tour was in Brooklyn, and someone from Mute was there. And so we got an email, and Angus was like, "Oh, have you heard of Mute Records?" I'm like, "Yeah, of course." Like, "Oh, someone is writing us and they want to meet with us." I'm like, "Oh, this has got to be a mistake, or some guy who hasn't heard about Mute Records named his record label Mute." I thought it was a joke. And then, next thing you know, we're having dinner with someone from England, So,
Wow.
yeah, it was crazy. And I think, we had at the time like a few, not a lot, but a few labels interested. It was kind of before a lot of labels were coming to Brooklyn. So Mute got to us really early, and we avoided a lot of like, we weren't courted as severely as some of our friends were, but they came early, and for many reasons, we just were like, this is perfect. And that's how that happened.
Wow, that's awesome. I would have loved to see some of those shows back then.
I don't know if any of those if you can see them online. But God, I don't. Yeah, it was fun. I can say that it was fun to play.
Do you ever like listen to the old work that you did in LIARS? Do you ever listen to those first couple records?
Ooh, no, I don't, and it's it's not anything to do out of like a personal feeling of like how I feel about that work. I think it's more like it's like watching what would it be like? This is maybe a cliche explanation. It's like reading a diary from when you were like younger, and you're scared to see how maybe emotional you were or how you handled things in a I don't know. So sometimes I do, because friends of mine will talk to me about it, or it's not like I refuse to. Oh, I can't look back, man. Oh no, that's the past. I'm all about blah blah blah. No, it's not a relationship like that. I think I just sort of feel like, God, I should have redone this part a bit better, or
right.
But no, it's never. It's not. It's I don't know. It feels a little. Let me see if you get this analogy. It's kind of like when you look at Lars from Metallica, and he's always got a Metallica shirt on. You're just like, I don't want to always wear a Metallica I feel weird wearing a Metallica shirt. But no, it's sometimes I do, and I mean, I'm very proud of what we did, and it's not that I have any bad like I said, it's not an aversion to it.
How do I say Nonpareils or Nonpareils?
Nonpareils, yeah.
Nonpareils. When did that start?
When I was in Berlin, after I left LIARS, I had some material, and I just finished, like I had material, and I wanted to finish a record because, I don't know if you have the same thing, but I was just thinking of it as a record, and I'm like, God, it would be really great if I could like see it on my iTunes, or hold it CDR and make a cover and give it to my friends for Christmas, or that was like the real goal. I mean, it was like I didn't have like I wasn't even going to give it to Mute. I just was like, okay, well, let's just see if I can make music and still enjoy it. And of course I did. And I finished the record, and a friend that used to work at Mute was like, "Oh, hey, I heard you finished a record. Can I hear it?" And I sent it to him. Just yeah. And he passed it on to Mute, and it just they were excited to put it out, which blew my mind. And I did that record, and it was kind of scary, but it made me realize I still loved writing music and making records. And so that's where I am now. I mean, I think it's like a process where when I don't have time to work on music, it feels really scary to get back into it. Like, maybe I won't like it anymore. Maybe I can't do it anymore. And then when I do it, I'm like, God, why did I ever stop? I'm such a better person when I'm working on music. I love it so much. I'm a happier person. I'm just very manic in that sense. And so.
No, I feel it. I always get like, it's like going to the gym or something like that. It's hard to start sometimes for any number of reasons, but then you do it and you feel so much better.
Absolutely. Yeah. Like when you're lying in bed, of course you're going to be like, no, I'm too tired to get exercise. But after you do it, your whole day is better, in my opinion.
How did it feel writing alone after so many years of, working together? I think
I could say this because it's been said a million, like in LIARS interviews, so I don't think it's a secret, but we used to write separately all the time. I mean, and it goes back to the 4-track days, where we we would finish songs and give them to each other rather than like saying, "Oh, hey, I have this idea." So really writing alone or composing alone, it's always been that way. I mean, again, I don't think I'm revealing anything with LIARS in terms of saying that. But so that wasn't really different. I think what was different is like saying, okay, this is how I want the record to be, and it's finished. At this point, it's finished. Or when you go to the mixing phase, you're like, okay, I can say alone that this is finished, and it's, it's good and bad. I'm not going to say it's like, oh my God, thank God I could do it. It's both, it's different. It's both. It's scary. It's more scary, but it's also, you can do it how you want, but then you're left with the scary fact that if you don't do it, nothing's going to get done, So, so that was fine. I mean, I think in terms of getting motivated, it was a different thing, and it still is, because I think, LIARS, we would tour a lot. We were a band that toured, and you put out a record, you toured. Like Nonpareils up until this point isn't that way. I'm hoping to change that, but so it's like that has to be created too. So I think all those things are very different and exciting and scary.
Mm-hmm. What kind of inspired the sound? Well, is the new record like Scented Pictures? Scented Pictures being the album you released in 2018. Is it similar, or what's the direction with the new stuff?
The people that I've played it for, the few people that have heard it, they say that they can hear a connection, but that it's different. I'm sorry, I'm the worst person to ask because I just make things way too complicated, or I'm sure there's a much more direct, like when you hear it, it's a much more simple and direct difference or not, or similarity. But I think just from my perspective, it's more, God. I think it's more musical in the sense that, like, the first record was dealing with a lot with like I was reprocessing things in the computer, like manipulating sounds, like acoustic sounds in order for them to sound digital. And it was this very, I think very head, like mental, conceptual approach. Like, ooh, I'm going to manipulate the. This one is just more like, I just want the music to sound good, and I don't care what instruments I use, or I want it to feel good, and I want it to be pretty or sad or you know. I think that's the best way. It's less intellectual. It's less claustrophobic, from what I've heard. It's more melodic, from what I've heard. So.
Cool. I'm interested to hear it. You guys or you always had a great balance of that kind of experimental, you know, working with sounds and concepts, and as well as songwriting. I think people sort of underestimate your songwriting ability.
Oh, well, that's extremely kind of you. I just love, I don't know. I just really love music, and I just try to make songs or records that I would like to hear, or that I think are, it's this thing. I just want to take part in music because I love it so much still. So I don't know. I'm like, I don't want it to sound like my inability to talk about my own music doesn't mean that it's like I love it more than anything, and it's so important to me. It's music is, and it just helps me to be a better person, so that I can relate to the people I love in a better way. And it's that important to me. I just have a difficult time explaining it.
No, I understand. It can be kind of, especially when you're writing it and making it, it can be so, I don't know, vague feeling, or like it just kind of happens, or it comes from somewhere else.
Exactly.
I tend to like really overthink my own process, and I feel like I'm almost the opposite to a fault, where it's like kind of OCD to every little thing has kind of like a reason or a deliberacy that I'm at least thinking about. It doesn't always come out that way. Like I can't always execute the way that I'm thinking about it, but at least for me, I sometimes, it definitely comes from just somewhere else outside of me that I don't even know. But then other times it's just like obsessive to every little detail and syllable and note. And
yeah, I understand. I mean, I think actually you offering that about your process is a way of saying what the new record, why it's different. So like, I think Scented Pictures was very OCD. I had notebooks. I had whatever things I was like inspired by that I kept a list of. And this one, for many reasons, I think it's just, I don't know how it's coming about. Somehow at the end of the day, I end up with music that I'm really excited about. And I'm kind of scared to question where it comes from or how I arrived to these conclusions until it's finished, because I don't know. I think right now I'm very like happy with things in my life. So, and I'm also trying to like live in a more balanced way where I'm less of like a studio rat, and I'm more, a more well-rounded human being. And I think that it makes, through just I shouldn't deserve any credit. It's not like I've developed this sense for it, but I think just in being a more balanced human being and a more sensitive or caring human being, it makes the music more well-rounded in that sense. So
that's really interesting.
Yeah. And again, it's not that I've figured out this way of, I don't know. Like, I literally sometimes feel like it's just finishing itself, and I get credit for it somehow, but really it's the people or feelings I have that, it's confusing.
There's probably less pressure as well. I mean, do you have plans to eventually play shows again? in the future or anything like that?
I would like to, for sure. Because I miss just playing instruments, and I miss playing with people. So yeah, I would love to. I don't know. It's something that I really want to do. Yeah, absolutely.
Is there like a release date or anything like that for the new record, and what's it called?
Oh, not there's. It's still super early.
Okay.
So, no, there's no release date because It's still in the early process. So,
I see.
yeah, yeah. I think I can only really say I'm working on it. It's coming soon. It's coming. It'll be out on mute.
Shout out to Mute. Go follow, like, subscribe to Mute Records, and
Please, God, that yeah, please, for sure.
Do you have anything you want to ask me while we're here?
Yeah. Are you working on new music?
Yeah, I'm always writing songs, and I don't know. I've been having sort of complicated feelings about music in general, and what I want and how to get it, and so I've got like an EP basically ready, and I'm trying to write like an LP and just kind of have either or, because I'd really like to work with like an established label and like put myself out there and grow an audience.
Mm-hmm.
But it's so difficult these days. I'm sure maybe you're familiar, but you know the industry and like the way labels work and how saturated it all is. It's so difficult to penetrate.
Mm.
Um, so I'm kind of at a toss up where it's like I want to do things my way and just release it how I want to, but I also would like to get an audience, and in order to do that, I need to kind of like play within the rules of the game, so to speak, with like the album cycles and all that kind of thing. But
Yeah.
then, nobody wants it. No labels want to do it, and press people will always ignore me. So it's all I care about is writing songs, and I just want to be able to do that and sustain it in some way and have people listen.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think I was just lucky that Mute got involved with us like super early on. So it was something that I was lucky enough to not be forced to sort of think about. But I think, yeah, I understand what you're saying, and I think you. I don't know. Yeah, if you ask me, I think you should always try to do the thing you want to be doing most, because people will see you doing that, and you know what I mean. It's like if writing songs is what you want to do the most, and you keep producing music, then if that's what you get noticed for, then that's what you are expected to do. So it's less difficult. If you get noticed for posting cooking videos to Instagram in order to promote your record so that you can do what you really want to do, which is write music, you might get stuck posting cooking videos, in which case you're going to be really unhappy. But I don't know. I know that might sound like a bit, what's the word? Idealistic, or it kind of doesn't give any sort of results in terms of expanding your audience. But I think that there's something to be said for, I think people, I don't know how it is now, but I believe, or I hope, that people take notice of that type of momentum, where if you love writing songs and you just keep putting out records regardless, it's something that I think people instinctively take notice of. Like, wow, Blush Cameron is just producing record after record, and clearly because Blush Cameron loves it. It's like, I think I don't know.
No, that makes sense. I think people do notice that kind of consistency at some point.
Yeah,
I think of like Guided by Voices or something like that, or like I think there's kind of like a handful of other, like I don't know, Cleaners from Venus or something, where maybe at the time there wasn't as much appreciation that they got kind of later down the line.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I think those are great examples, but I mean, and nothing can help you sleep better at night than when you, regardless of the outcome, you have material that you've worked on, you have work, you know, you have songs, you've been able to do what you're passionate about, you know, like the outcome regardless can erase, you know, a new song that you wrote, and how exciting that is to write like a song that you like, you know. So,
yeah, so
I
true.
don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe I think that if I were to have to be honest, it's like a strategy to avoid having a strategy, I guess. Because really, like, yeah, you could argue, okay, but that doesn't really help improve like I guess it's like a leap of faith, but the thing that isn't faith-based is the fact that, yeah, you'll have the work to show for it, you know. Like I think anything where, to me, that's at least what I would follow, is anything where you're productive and you're able to work hard at it, you'll be in a better way with yourself. That's my belief, but yeah.
I really appreciate that insight coming from you. And thanks again so much for doing this. And I'm such a huge fan. And, you know, feel free to keep in touch and contact me anytime. And I'd love to hear, you know, your new music when it's ready to be heard.
I'm excited for you to hear it. I think I'm really happy making it, and I think I'm really excited about it. But and you keep in touch too. I really liked your music that I checked out, and I think if I may say so, I'm not coming from any different position, because we're both making music on our own. But I think yeah, it seems like you have a really great attitude and approach to it, and just keep the momentum going, and all the other stuff is secondary. I think just yeah, be productive.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, I think it'll turn out great. I think your work has a great spirit, and that's a very important thing.
I'm gonna throw that quote on the next album cover. Throw it on the back. It has a great spirit, Aaron Hemphill.
But you know, you also have to understand that I'm not an expert in anything. I'm just a very lucky person. So